we've been chatting about Soka Gakkai and Nichiren Buddhism, but as many people know, there are quite a lot of different types of Buddhism, lots of different kind of denominations, you might call them, in Buddhism. In what ways is Nichiren, as understood by Soka Gakkai, different from those other forms? What makes it stand out?
Right. Yes, I mean, there are broad streams of Buddhism that developed through the course of history. I mean, Nichiren Buddhism is, as we discuss it and understand it, very much part of the Mahayana tradition of Buddhism, based on a particularly one Buddhist sutra from the Mahayana tradition, the Lotus Sutra. And Nichiren, having studied all the different forms of Buddhism that were in Japan in the 13th century, he focused very much on the Lotus Sutra because he felt that it described the teaching of Shakyamunis that enabled everybody to reveal their potential. So he focused on it because it talked about, in the early part of the Lotus Sutra, it talks about replacing the three vehicles, which were sort of early understandings of different practices for different types of people, with the one vehicle, the idea that, which he called the Buddha vehicle. So the direct route for individuals to reveal their potential. The Lotus Sutra refers to the enlightenment of women, and also evil people like Devadatta's challenging, difficult cousin. And it talks also about, it gives a very exciting perspective on the Buddha's lifespan. Chapter 16 of the Lotus Sutra gives an extraordinary understanding of the eternity of the Buddha's life. So Nichiren took the title of the Lotus Sutra as it was in Japan, which was then pronounced Myoho Renge Kyo, and he added a phrase at the beginning, Nam or Namu, and he taught that chanting this phrase, Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, wasn't just praising the Lotus Sutra, but actually was much more than that, and was the way to access the Buddha potential in every person's life, to reveal the qualities of the Buddha's courage, the Buddha's wisdom and compassion, his creativity and life force in everybody, whether they're men or women, whether they're rich or poor, educated or non-educated. It was a straightforward practice for anybody at any time and any place.
Because that is quite revolutionary in a sense, because one of the things that many people think about when they think about Buddhism is the lack of kind of universality of access to what it offers. The idea that many lives might be needed, that it has a monastic organisation that concentrates on one set of practices, and lay organisation concentrating on others. So there's that kind of universality. But the other thing that immediately strikes me when you say that is the simplicity. And I don't mean easiness, but the idea that the practice might not be easy to get right and to do, and might take lots of time, but that it doesn't require a huge amount of complication to explain the basics of it to somebody. So that does something about its universality.
Yes, no, it is accessible. But I think that the other sort of the key point is that where it provides the process we were talking about in a previous conversation, that it provides a philosophical basis for looking at one's life and then impacting on one's family, community, and wider world. So it's very much, I think you can look into it and see the esoteric elements of how Buddhism developed if you want to, but actually the intention is that it is straightforward and easy to adopt.
And that actually does make it stand out amongst some of the particularly kind of Japanese forms of Buddhism, which sometimes when you're studying them, if you're a student, they seem almost intentionally difficult and esoteric, and especially when I'm making students read koans and things, they seem determined to make them not understand them and to kind of break their brains and to be. So there's something kind of rather distinctive about the approach in Nichiren of refusing to go down that route, of taking a very different route in Buddhism towards accessibility.
Yeah,
you put it. I mean, that I think really makes it stand out. But then it still remains a form of Buddhism. It doesn't consider itself as a different, separate form of religion. So what does it kind of still hold in common with Buddhism, such that we still consider it a type of Buddhism or within the Buddhist broader family?
Right. well, I mean, the starting point I think is that it's based on the Lotus Sutra,
Yeah.
which in the broader tradition, comes out of the Mahayana canon of sutras. We talk very much about the three treasures. Some people call them three jewels or Tri Ratna, but the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, or the community of believers, is something very important to us to explore. We also, the categorization in the Eightfold Path, wisdom, ethics, morality, and meditation. You can find those in Nichiren Buddhism. It may be that we describe them in a slightly different way, but those core elements of what wider schools of Buddhism would consider as very important are definitely at the heart of it. Compassion, the bodhisattva spirit to take action for the happiness of other people, is very much at the heart of Nichiren Buddhism. I suppose that one of the distinctions that you sometimes find, and I find in discussion with people from other Buddhist traditions, is that we talk about revealing our Buddhahood here and now. And for some people in some Buddhist traditions, that is a challenge to this idea that an ordinary human being in this lifetime can reveal their Buddhahood. But what we mean by that is that we believe that everyone has this resource of Buddhahood inherent in their life, and that Buddhist practice enables us to reveal that. So to have the courage, compassion, and wisdom of the Buddha in our daily lives.
That's really interesting, and I think what comes across from listening to you then is this idea of the Buddha nature, which does evolve out of, particularly some forms of Mahayana thought, mention it quite a lot. But it seems that in kind of Nichiren Buddhism, it's really foregrounded. Our potential to be a Buddha is really right there. And by being a Buddha, it doesn't necessarily mean starting a religion and being like the historical Buddha or being, Shakyamuni as people refer to him. But it means about embodying those attributes or virtues or character traits in some way. And find so that again speaks to me more of the universality of saying, even from the lowest person to the highest person socially, whatever they find themselves in, their potential to become Buddha-like is the same.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a wonderful principle. I think I read about it the first day I looked into Nichiren Buddhism. It's called the 10 worlds or 10 states of life. And it looks at how we respond to what's going on in life and suggests that there are 10 broad ways that we can respond. And so some of the names of these worlds are very obvious. There's sort of humanity or tranquility, which is a very reasonable way of responding. There's rapture, when we achieve things that we're interested in achieving, we respond in a wonderful kind of bubbly, excited way. But there's hell and hunger, anger, animality. And those 6 worlds are considered to be lower worlds. And then there are 4 higher worlds, which take a bit of effort to experience, sometimes called learning, realization, a compassionate world called bodhisattva, and then Buddhahood. This idea of the 10 worlds says that we can also respond to what's going on in life from the life state of the Buddha. And yes, you're right, it's foregrounded in Nichiren's writings. He's very explicit. This is the purpose that he sees of what the Lotus Sutra was about, really fundamentally making it clear that we all have this potential and we can reveal it here and now. We don't have to wait for another lifetime. We don't have to wait for certain causes or conditions to be unfolded. We don't have to have a PhD in Buddhism. If we make the right causes, which he said is to chant the phrase Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, then we stimulate the Buddha nature from within our life.
And the last thing I want to mention, I think, or to kind of ask you about, is that on one hand, it can seem like the approach of SGI is very simple. You just chant the name of the Lotus Sutra. But on the other hand, we're sat here next door to a fantastically big library. And something that always has struck me as similar, or as a commonality in many forms of Buddhism, is the enthusiasm for kind of scholastic enterprise. So I think there's a kind of balance, I'm not sure it's a tension, but there certainly seems to be a balancing going on between the simplicity of the practice and then the kind of enthusiasm for scholarly work. So certainly that seems, from my brief awareness of SGI to be the case. But would you kind of characterise it like that? Or?
Well, we're sitting next to an extraordinary library of
Absolutely.
Oriental philosophy here. I mean, Nichiren said, in one of his writings, he said, exert yourself in the 2 ways of practice and study. Without practice and study, there can be no Buddhism. and then he explained that both practice and study arise from faith. But he made it clear that it's not about having a deep intellectual understanding of Buddhism in order for it to work, but it's useful to have an understanding of basic building block principles like the 10 worlds, like dependent origination, like various other things, in order to understand what's going on in one's life when we're practicing. So yes, we do a monthly magazine we call The Art of Living, and in it, part of that is a study lecture, a study article, which explores different Buddhist principles so that people can have more of an understanding about the Buddhist view of the universe and life, and how we can see our lives unfolding as we continue to practice.
So even when there is a kind of interest in the theoretical and the kind of scholastic, it's brought back to people's lives and the practical application.
Very much so. It's there are people who are interested in the kind of the very theoretical, the very academic approach, but for our members, we really encourage study that is going to be it's going to be useful and applicable, so we try not to use too much jargon, and we try and express, whether it's in English for the UK or other Anglophone countries, or now Nichiren's writings have been translated into any number of languages you can imagine. But we're trying. Nichiren wanted it to be accessible. His letters are wonderful examples of expressing very deep concepts in a way that was relevant to people in 13th century Japan, and we try and take that and draw those principles out and express them in our own ways. We're helped incredibly by the president of SGI, a man called Daisaku Ikeda, who is now, at the moment he's 88. He continues to write explaining how Nichiren Buddhism can be applicable in people's lives in a very, very clear language. He's an extraordinary example himself, but he also writes in a way that will help people to understand how the practice of Buddhism will make a difference, and they can undergo their human revolution and make a difference in the wider world.
Thank you.